On the 30th of October 2020, Samong Moni Jasmine was shot 6 times while seated at the back of an Uber in the township of Wentworth, Durban. Jasmine had just stepped into the car, her eyes scanning the streets for any signs of danger. She was notoriously cautious. Her life built on power, drugs, and violence meant danger lurked at every corner. But even the most careful plans can crumble in a world where trust is non-existent and enemies are everywhere. As the Uber driver prepared to pull away, the passenger door was yanked open. Before Jasmine could react, a man with a firearm aimed directly at her. The first shot rang out, followed by 5 more in rapid succession. 2 bullets struck her chest, 3 tore into her stomach, and 1 hit her leg. The Uber driver, terrified, fled on foot, leaving the Queen of Wentworth to face her assassins alone. One of her killers leaned into the car and fired at close range, ensuring there was no chance of survival. Moments later, the hitmen disappeared into the chaos of the streets, leaving Jasmine bleeding in the back seat. When the driver returned, he rushed Jasmine to the hospital, but it was too late. The woman who controlled Wentworth's heroin trade, who earned both fear and respect across Durban, took her last breath in the emergency room. Her reign over the streets came to an abrupt, violent end. Samong Jasmine, better known as Moni, was no ordinary woman. Born and raised in the poverty-stricken township of Wentworth, she grew up surrounded by hardship, unemployment, and the ever-present influence of street gangs. Life in Wentworth was tough, and for many young people, joining a gang seemed like the only way to survive. Jasmine's initiation into the criminal underworld began with a relationship. Her first boyfriend was a small-time dealer working for one of the local gangs. He introduced her to the world of drugs, teaching her the ins and outs of the trade. But their relationship was cut short when he was killed in a gang-related shooting. Instead of retreating from the violent world that had claimed his life, Jasmine transformed her grief into ambition. She decided to take over his street corner and eventually the entire operation. By 2017, Jasmine had formed her own gang, the Cartel. Unlike other gangs in Wentworth, the Cartel wasn't just about survival, it was about domination. Jasmine didn't want to work for anyone else, she wanted to be the boss. Inspired by the fictional character from the popular TV show Queen of the South, she modeled herself after the ruthless drug queen pin. But while Teresa Mendoza ruled on screen, Jasmine's empire was very real. Jasmine's gang rose to power by capitalizing on Durban's lucrative and rapidly growing heroin market. Heroin, commonly referred to as caps on the streets due to its unique packaging in pill capsules, had become the dominant drug in Durban's poorest neighborhoods, including Wentworth. These capsules revolutionized the heroin trade, making the drug cheaper to produce, easier to distribute, and highly profitable for the gangs who controlled its supply. Jasmine, a sharp and ambitious player in this world, quickly understood the potential of the heroin trade and was determined to dominate it. Capsules were a game-changer in the heroin market. A kilogram of heroin could yield up to 25,000 capsules, which were sold for approximately 15 rand each, cheaper than a loaf of bread. With 1 kilogram generating a street value of up to 375,000 rand, it was no surprise that the trade became a bloody battleground. Jasmine's operations grew rapidly, and her ruthlessness ensured she remained at the top of the chain. Her gang, known as the Cartel, started small, operating out of Lansdowne Road in the Barracks, a dilapidated block of flats in Wentworth. But Jasmine's ambitions extended far beyond her local turf. By 2017, the Cartel had grown from a local gang to one of Durban's most powerful heroin syndicates. Jasmine expanded her territory aggressively, pushing into neighboring townships such as Lamontville, Umlazi, and Kwamashu. Her network supplied heroin to smaller street dealers who relied on her for their stocks. The cartel's operations reportedly earned them an estimated 200,000 rand per week, if not more. For residents of Wentworth, the queenpin of the cartel had become both a hero and a villain. On one hand, Jasmine helped struggling families with financial aid and food parcels. Yet on the other, her drug empire brought endless violence to the streets. Her expansion, however, was not without consequences. Rival gangs who had long controlled their respective territories began to see Jasmine's growing influence as a threat. Taxi bosses in Umlazi, who were heavily involved in drug distribution, clashed with her over control of the heroin supply chain. Even within her own gang, fractures began to emerge as power struggles and paranoia set in. The cartel's success was built on violence, and Jasmine's rise to power had left a trail of blood in its wake. Rivals were eliminated on sight, and shootouts in broad daylight became a regular occurrence. The heroin trade itself added fuel to the fire. Unlike previous methods of heroin distribution, which involved plastic straws or wrapped chalk sticks, caps were easier and quicker to produce. The automated capsule filling machines used to make the caps were imported from countries like China and India, and a single machine could produce up to 25,000 capsules an hour. While the machines were expensive, costing around 250,000 rand, the profits far outweighed the costs. Jasmine's ability to procure these machines and maintain a steady supply of heroin made her the envy of rival gangs and a target for many. As her empire grew, so did the violence. In 2019, a botched drug deal between the cartel and drug dealers linked to the Umlazi taxi industry led to a series of retaliatory attacks. A major Umlazi gang member was killed, and his body was dumped in a field, a move believed to have been orchestrated by Jasmine's crew. The Umlazi gang responded by launching an attack on Jasmine's home turf, spraying the barracks with AK-47 fire in an attempt to kill her and her crew. Though Jasmine survived the attempt on her life, the incident marked a turning point. The escalating violence caught the attention of the police, and the newly formed anti-gang unit began focusing their efforts on dismantling the cartel. Despite the mounting pressure from law enforcement, Jasmine's drug empire continued to flourish. Her operations were highly organized, with dealers working in shifts and money flowing in from every corner of Durban. She reinvested her profits into real estate and Uber cabs, creating a facade of legitimacy to mask her criminal activities. But the cracks in her empire were beginning to show. The Umlazi taxi bosses were still gunning for her. Rival gangs in Wentworth were vying for control of her territory, and rumors of disloyalty within her own ranks began to spread. To the residents of the barracks in Wentworth, Samong Moni Jasmine was more than just a notorious gang leader. She was a provider, someone who brought light to the darkest corners of their lives. In a township plagued by poverty, unemployment, and neglect, Jasmine used her drug empire to act as a benefactor to those around her. Her wealth, generated through the heroin trade, wasn't just spent on herself. She shared it with the people of her community, earning their respect and, for some, even their love. For struggling families, Jasmine was a lifeline. She would pay overdue electricity bills, ensuring homes didn't go dark. She provided food parcels for households that couldn't afford to put meals on the table. When children in the barracks needed school uniforms, Jasmine stepped in and paid for them. Weekends were often a time of celebration, as she hired jumping castles for the kids, organized parties, and even hosted fully catered Mother's Day and Father's Day events with traditional biryani, snacks, and cool drinks. Jasmine's generosity gave hope to a community that had long been abandoned by authorities. "She wasn't a bad person," one resident said. "She helped us when no one else would." For many, Jasmine represented what the government and law enforcement failed to provide, a sense of security, stability, and care. But her generosity came at a steep price. The barracks, once a close-knit community, became ground zero for Durban's escalating gang wars. Weekly drive-by shootings, gun battles, and violence turned the area into a war zone. Innocent bystanders often became collateral damage as rival gangs fought for control of the heroin trade. Residents lived in constant fear, with the sound of gunfire becoming a normal part of life. Children couldn't play outside freely, and families avoided the streets after dark. Jasmine's drug empire had brought wealth and temporary relief to the community, but it had also unleashed a wave of terror that devastated the same people she claimed to protect. Her reign divided the community. For some, she was a hero who brought relief to desperate families. For others, she was the source of their suffering, a woman whose empire of drugs and violence destroyed countless lives. "Drugs are killing our community," one resident admitted. "The same people who help us are also the ones tearing us apart." As Jasmine's empire grew, so did the number of people who wanted her dead. Rival gangs resented her control over the heroin trade. Taxi bosses from Umlazi, who had their own drug networks, saw her as a competitor. Even within her own gang, tensions began to rise. Jasmine's decision to expand aggressively into other territories brought new challenges, and her quick release on bail after her 2020 arrest raised eyebrows among her crew. "She's working with the cops," some whispered. "Why else would she be the only one out on bail?" The rumors of betrayal created cracks within the cartel. Jasmine, once untouchable, found herself surrounded by distrust. She became more cautious, never traveling in her own car and asking others to book Ubers for her. But caution wasn't enough to save her. In July 2020, the violence escalated. A drug deal between the cartel and dealers connected to the Umlazi taxi industry went wrong, resulting in a deadly shooting. One man was killed, and another was injured. In retaliation, members of the Umlazi gang launched an attack on Jasmine's territory, opening fire on the barracks with AK-47s. Jasmine wasn't home at the time, but the message was clear. Her enemies wanted her dead. The South African police's anti-gang unit began to take notice. In September 2020, they raided the Wentworth police station, uncovering corruption and arresting officers with ties to the cartel. Among those arrested was Warrant Officer Brian James, who was believed to be protecting Jasmine's gang. Shortly after, Jasmine and several of her crew members were arrested on charges of murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. Jasmine was granted bail, but the rest of her gang remained behind bars. Her release only added to the growing mistrust within the cartel. She knew her time was running out, but she wasn't ready to give up her throne. In the weeks leading up to her death, Jasmine became increasingly paranoid. She changed her routines, avoided public places, and relied on friends and family to book her rides, but no amount of caution could protect her from the enemies circling around her. On the morning of October 30th, Jasmine asked a relative to book her an Uber. The car arrived on Marine Drive, and Jasmine, dressed sharply as always, walked toward it. As she got inside, she noticed a car driving slowly past. Something felt off, but the driver's voice interrupted her thoughts, asking her to confirm her identity. She held up her phone to show him the ride details, but before he could respond, the passenger door was thrown open. 6 shots rang out, shattering the silence of the morning. Jasmine slumped in the back seat as her killers vanished into the streets. The Queen of Wentworth had finally been dethroned. Jasmine's death sent shockwaves through Wentworth. Rumors swirled about who was responsible. Was it the Umlazi taxi bosses seeking revenge for the botched drug deal? Was it a rival gang, tired of living in her shadow? Or was it one of her own, someone who had grown tired of her rule? What was certain was that Jasmine's death marked the end of an era. The cartel, once a dominant force in Durban's heroin trade, began to crumble. The gang wars in Wentworth only intensified, with new players stepping into the power vacuum Jasmine left behind. At her funeral, friends and family gathered to say goodbye to the woman they called Moni. For some, she was a hero. For others, she was a villain. But for everyone in Wentworth, she was a symbol of the township's struggle. A woman who rose from nothing to rule an empire only to be brought down by the same violence that had built her legacy. Jasmine's story is a cautionary tale, a reminder of the cost of power in a world where loyalty is fleeting and enemies are everywhere. In the end, even the Queen of the South couldn't escape the chaos of her own making. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below.